Let's get started. Welcome everyone to another GADOE virtual workshop. I'll be your co-host. I'm Joy Hatcher. I'm the Social Studies Program Manager.
And I'm Jessica Booth. I'm the Fine Arts Program Manager at the DOE.
So welcome to Let's Get Visual Instructional Activities that SWIRL. We have our contact information on the last slide. After the session is over today, we're going to email you both the PowerPoint and a link to our virtual workshop playlist where you can access all of our videos and all the materials for all of our workshops. And of course, you can email us at any time with questions, comments, outrageous objections. So let's get going. This is a art integrated workshop. Hence the reason you have social studies and fine arts people leading it. It's an 8-hour workshop. We relied heavily on Jess and her background in the arts to develop it. We presented it, Jess. Where did we present this?
We presented it in DC at the National Social Studies Conference and in New York at the National Art Education Association Conference. And we've presented it all across Georgia at different RESAs and school districts.
It's an 8-hour workshop that we're going to shove into an hour. Mainly focusing on the first part, which is introducing your visual journal and some visual literacy strategies. So as you can see, you are here in the 8-hour workshop. We're going to do part 1 and some change, hopefully. So let's get going. We got a lot to do. So let's introduce you to your visual journal.
Right. And hopefully you enjoy the series and keep taking part 2 and 3 so you get the full day. A visual journal, this is actually a page out of one of my own visual journals, is really just a fancy word for a notebook. It doesn't have to have pretty paper. It can have, it can be made of found objects. It can be made of, people have used textbooks that are being recycled and painted over them. But the idea of a visual journal is this idea of recording what you're learning to deepen meaning and to make sure that you're retaining more information and you're making what's being taught real through the use of symbolism and color.
So, as I desperately try to click, we want you to try it today. So I have my journal here with me. Hopefully you have a piece of paper or your journal with you, lines, white paper, doesn't matter, something to write with and something to write on. So what we want you to do is take notes today in the virtual workshop. And as you're taking your notes, what we want you to do is think about how your notes are visually. What is their structure? How are you putting it on the page and what structure? Think about maybe color or size for emphasis. Think about what visual supports you might want to put there in order to support the text that you're writing, and how are you using your space? And at one point during this very short workshop, we're going to ask you to share visually. I mean, so you'll need to turn on your camera. Of course, it's completely voluntary, but we learn better by doing. So right now, this minute, we want you to start by taking some notes. Here we go. So the focus of this 3-part workshop is to integrate art and visual literacy into the social studies classroom. We are going to build up your knowledge of visual literacy and how to do it using visual journals. And we're also going to talk about the art standards, because what art integration is when art standards and social studies standards are taught together with fidelity and assessed that way.
Yeah, with the same level of fidelity and assessment.
So let's get weaving.
I'm going to let it all come through. But basically, when you think about a visual journal and you think about a sketchbook, you might be thinking about something like I have, a little artist sketchbook. I tend to make them really small because I like to be able to throw them in a bag or in my pocket. But it could just be a few sheets of copy paper that were borrowed from the copy room, stapled together. That's 100% fine for your students to be able to work on, or for you to be able to work on. So what's a visual journal? It's a place you're going to show your thinking. It's a place for students to make personally meaningful symbols. It's okay to have a mixture of pictures. It could be things that are in handouts that you're giving students, but it also needs to have their own text and imagery mixed in. And for most people, it's a great place for metacognition, where you can think about thinking. It's a place where you can visualize ideas and then not have a reflex reaction. Just go ahead and jot down what you're thinking. If you're talking about a conflict or you're talking about a compare and contrast, really flesh it out in the visual journal, then use that to articulate an answer in class.
It's also, Jess, something that our kids go back to, not just to go back and study their notes, but it makes their note taking more meaningful. And I think this is where I talk about when I use this in my classroom. My kids took MARTA to school. And one good time, one of my students left their visual journal in the MARTA bus. Now, MARTA buses don't act like regular buses. Like if you leave it on your regular bus, the bus driver picks it up for you and it might be there at the end of the day or, tomorrow. If you leave it on the MARTA bus, it is gone. And I literally had to call the counselor because the child was so heartbroken, because this is their doodles. This is their thoughts, their feelings. This isn't just notes that they took from my class. These are their thoughts, their artwork. It's a very personal thing, and it makes meaning. It's them making meaning of what they're learning in the context of the day. So we find students going back to it frequently to work on something. They might have taken notes in your class, but they're going to go back later on and kind of add embellishment or add color for emphasis. So it becomes a very living, breathing thing for them.
Yeah, and I think students get a lot of handouts, and sometimes journals have been interpreted as like gluing the handouts into a sketchbook or a notebook. That doesn't make the personal meaning that allows the students to create connections by use of color and symbolism. So this is from Leonardo da Vinci. He's famous for having so many different kinds of sketchbook imagery that we have from history. And, this visual notebooks have been used forever. If you look at any of the famous artists, you're going to see it, but also a lot of what we know about how science developed, about how mechanics developed, it all comes from sketches that are still left over. It becomes this recorded history, this visual record. So sketchbooks usually have research and new ideas. They have reflections. They're going to have future ideas, and they're going to explore concepts. It's not a new concept, and almost every subject area has a journal, notebook of some sort.
As we shift towards inquiry in social studies, we want kids to think like historians, think like geographers, think like political scientists and economists. And that means we want them to work that way as well. So we want them to take these primary and secondary sources, not just documents, but also paintings, sculptures, artwork, political cartoons, map, graphs, and charts, all of those things, and kind of digest them and spit out, that's a visual for you, their ideas, their arguments, their claims about what they're reading and seeing. And their visual journal is a place to do that. So on the right, you'll notice that is kind of the process for social studies inquiry, where there's a big question in the middle that is glaringly missing. I guess I clipped that and forgot to put it back in. My bad. So there's a great big essential question that's driving the research, that leads them to ask more questions, do their research, plan their response, create whatever product they need for your classroom, and then improve it based on feedback from the teacher and their peers. Now, if you are a STEM school, this might look like the engineering design model. If you're familiar with science, this might look like scientific processes. But to connect to what Jess was saying, in STEM, they're required to keep an engineering notebook. Engineers keep these journals to record their ideas and their thoughts in a visual way. So this is very much part of the inquiry process, keeping a static place for your thoughts and your ideas and your information. So today, actually, um, Joanne and I went to the High Museum. They have an exhibit called Picturing the Dream. So I just wanted to kind of slip it in here. It's here until when, Joanne?
This weekend,
This
Sunday.
weekend through
Yeah,
Sunday?
Sunday's the last day.
So Picturing the Dream is an exhibit about the artwork that goes into picture books about the civil rights movement. And here are some of the photos that I took today of artwork that is in the High that are in these books. And then I thought to myself, read alouds, picture books are for K-12. I used picture books in my high school and AP economics, world history, US history classes, because read alouds are a beautiful blend of social studies inquiry, visual literacy, and reading and writing. So I couldn't help but slip that in there today. So here is Jess with visual literacy.
Well, this term visual literacy is not new. John Deebs is who was kind of credited with coining the term, but the idea of visual literacy is that students don't just learn through text. They're taking in the colors, they're taking in other sensory experiences. So, if you think about movies, that's always a great way to think about visual literacy. Like if you see, if as a viewer, you can tell a lot about the kind of movie it is from the colors of the backgrounds of the scenes. If they're all really dark and moody, it might be a scary movie. You can tell by the sounds you're hearing, whether that's the music or the sounds that are going on in the environment in the film. You can tell by the facial expressions of the people who are actually doing this work. So visual literacy is kind of like this conglomeration of competencies that all humans have. And we assume that students know how to take these things and interpret them. It could be a symbol, it could be an object. Like I look at a star and I think of lots of different things. I think of good grades. I think of the actual stars in the sky. I think of gold stars. I think of the stars on a wand for Cinderella. It's one of those things where everybody brings their own visual literacy and their own interpretations to what they're seeing. And as teachers, we want to try to guide students to be able to interpret the world around them, and in your case, the history that's going on around them. Do you want to add to that, Joy?
I do. I think my favorite part of this particular piece is that highlighted section. We want to create a visually literate student, which means someone who's able to discriminate and interpret. Those are those higher level thinking. The everything around them, including dance and photographs and legal documents, all of the things. And so that's what we're kind of shooting for there. So where is visual literacy and inquiry? We're going to take 1 minute. And in that 1 minute, I don't want you to write anything. I just want you to, Jennifer, can you time us? I hope that she's
Yes.
Great. So I want you to look at these sources, and I want you to think about how they relate. There are two sources here. There's, the first one and the second one. First one and the second one. Take 1 minute, read these sources, and then determine how they relate to visual literacy. 1 minute starts now. A minute is a long time, Jess.
Time.
All right. Volunteers, type in the chat or unmute your mic. Either way works. What did you see as it relates to visual literacy in these two sources about inquiry? Or what connections did you make? As we're waiting for you to type, I'm going to call on people. Casey.
For me, the things that I noticed were the 4 steps of inquiry-based learning, the second source. To me, visually, it was easy to see the 4 steps because of how it was laid out. Is that what you're looking for?
That is, well, was it what I thought that you might say? No, but is it accurate? Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
I
cool.
love that. You're absolutely right. Those are visually separated by bullets. I like it. What else? Think about the definition of visual literacy. Teaching kids to discriminate and interpret objects, artwork, the world around them.
So obviously in the first image, they are examining some kind of visual matter. And it looks like they're talking about it.
Okay. When in the 4 steps on the right, when might they be practicing visual literacy? Where might they be focusing on it?
In the research phase, when they're presenting what they're learning.
Hey, Miko. Yes. Also, just to go on what Casey said, if you look on the image on the left, what I notice visually is that those students are in groups to do this analysis. So there's support there for analyzing that visual. All right, let's go to the next topic. This workshop is called Let's Get Visual Strategies That Swirl. So let's focus for just a second on what SWIRL is. SWIRL, if you're not familiar, is all the different ways that students are showing what they know in social studies inquiry. So they're speaking, writing, illustrating, reading, and listening. So based on the question, where does visual literacy fit in here? Where do you think visual literacy fits in student SWIRL? There's an obvious answer.
Illustrating?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Which is student drawing, but it could also be analyzing a visual. Absolutely. But how about writing? What if I said you have to put visual literacy in writing? How does that connect? How does visual literacy connect with student writing?
They're able to plan out their ideas visually, and then put them into words.
Yes. Or they're writing about analyzing a visual. They're writing down what they think about a painting. And that really translates to speaking as well, right? They are talking about what they think about a painting, or they're talking about an illustration that they created. So, and then if they're talking with a peer, then they're also listening to that peer about that analysis. So really visual literacy fits in every single category of SWIRL, and writing and reading are going together in the same way. If I'm writing about a visual, or if I'm reading about it and I'm doing that analysis. So all of the parts of SWIRL are focused in visual literacy, or can be focused in visual literacy. And that illustrating piece connects directly back to that definition of visual literacy, where we're trying to develop students who can discriminate and interpret, and it's part of that creation process. All right, I'm going to give us a 30-second break to finish any notes. And also, I want us to write our definition of visual literacy based on what we have looked at so far. But as you write your definition of visual literacy, I want you to think about how you're writing it in a visual way. So I'll give you an example. Here is some notes that I took. And notice I created some that are, like Casey mentioned, bulleted to separate ideas. Some of them I did kind of like a circle map, which is also, a visual strategy. If you have colored pencils or markers, feel free to use that. If you're familiar with Prezi uses size. So if there's a word that is more important than the other words you want to focus, maybe you make it bigger. But take 30 seconds. Jennifer, can you time us? You could be the official timer today.
Yes.
30 seconds to write down your definition of visual literacy. Go.
That's time.
All right. It's time for a checkup. We're almost at the halfway mark. What I'd like for us to do is turn on our video cameras and hold up I'm going to stop sharing so we have more screen. And I want you to take 30 seconds to look at everybody else's sketchbook that they put up. And I want you to look at them with these 3 questions. What do you see as it relates to visual literacy? What do you think? And what do you wonder about how they organized their notes, how they wrote the notes? What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? I'm going to stop share so we can turn on our cameras. If you haven't already, you might want to put it on gallery view. That way you can see everybody at once. And I'm going to time this time because Jennifer's holding up her thing. So what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? 30 seconds starts now. Oh, it's kind of hard to show it up there and then look at other people too, huh?
Yeah.
Gonna have to peek around. And time. All right. What did you see? What did you think? Or what did you wonder? And you guys could just unmute yourselves since we're all looking at each other.
I've seen a lot of bullet points where we just jot down ideas. Since we don't really have time to write it all out and we have all these ideas, we just put them into bullets or put them into a list.
Okay. But that's a visual, right? Separating ideas, one
Yes.
bullet from the next. Mm-hmm. Good. What else? Joanne, you disappeared. And Davis, I think that you're muted, but I see you talking.
Yes, I have dogs in the room, remember?
Oh,
So-
yes, I do.
Okay, sorry about that. I said I noticed there were a lot of arrows pointing to the next idea and abbreviations.
So symbols, use of
Yes.
symbols and abbreviations. Good. Time, right? Those long words, got to get them in there. I saw some people use, Jennifer, can you hold yours up? Didn't you use some size? Yeah, so that question is really big for me. So to me, that's important. And I noticed that you also had different colors for different ideas.
Yeah, so I have some quick sketches. Of course, they're not like Jess's sketches, but I do have quick sketches. But I saw lots of sketches as well.
Notice, Jess, don't pull up yours, because
I know Jess pulls hers, and it's like I'm not worthy.
Well, we were talking, so there wasn't much drawing happening.
Yes, that's how I get her. Anyone else notice anything? What do you wonder? Oh, Kimberly, I see a whole like art studio behind your head.
Uh-huh.
Those are some really cool little paintbrushes. And you're muted.
I wonder, there was someone that had one up that had a box with ideas in it. So I wondered if the things that were boxed in were the most important things that they wanted to focus on, or they were gonna wanted to remember or draw more ideas out of it.
Was it, well, I have a little box. I don't think that was it, but this was kind of a mock-up for me of an idea that I had for a visual literacy thing. So I was kind of sketching out how it might look on a worksheet.
See, so that's what I wondered about, if it was something that was coming up.
I think a lot of times at this point in the longer presentation, people are wondering like, okay, so how is this going to look in my class? And we spend most of the day doing those activities. So we are going to have some activities coming up that you'll do along with us in your home space.
But if you look, this is really just a whole bunch of words on a paper, right? And if your kids are trying to take notes in your class, it might look the same way because they're trying to abbreviate, they're trying to draw arrows. But what we want them to do is think about how you're putting them on there. So I put bullets. Dang it, Jess. You and your dancy.
We were supposed to write our definition. I said using visual clues to interpret the world around us. So I have my eye and I have my magnifying glass. And I just remember as a kid, I went to Catholic school and the nuns were not known for being really, really hands-on in learning. It was a lot of rote memorization. And I spent most of my time doing visual note-taking so that I could remember the lists and lists of things that were in chalk on the board. So those symbols that I made, like the magnifying glass and the eyeball, are what in my brain I would be remembering on the test. And I could kind of look around my page to remember the things that went with it. The symbolism became the thing that linked it to my real world.
And using symbols, using bullets, but then you could use bullets and alternate that with color. Or if you can use color just maybe with one word. For meaning. So if you are talking about, agriculture, maybe in the student's head, they always pull out the green to write that word. So we just want them to think about how color has meaning, how structure has meaning. And if you use thinking maps, all that are visual ways to represent something. So what we don't want you to think is that we're asking your kids to draw their notes. That is not what this is. What this is finding ways to structure information that will lead to helping them with writing, that will lead to helping them with all of the other things in social studies. And one of the things that happens when we do this face-to-face workshop, you guys are welcome to come and join us again because you get a fabulous sketchbook.
You get lots of freebies.
You get lots of freebies, yeah.
Color pencils and all kinds of stuff.
If you can see what is missing from this page.
All I see is white right now.
Words.
Yes. What's missing?
Words.
And lines.
Lines.
And symbols.
Because lines provide a structure for your students. When you put lines on a page, what does it mean?
To write.
Right sentences, left to right. So I don't know if you've had kids before where you're like, okay, take out a blank sheet of paper and I want you to draw a blah, blah, blah. And you'll have a kid come up and say, can I have a piece of copy paper? because the structure of the lines does not work in their head with the creation of something. They can't draw through the lines. It's not who they are, right? So giving a student a page without lines allows them to be creative and create their own structure in their head of how the information should go on the page. When we give workshops, when we give these in workshops, some teachers automatically do this because they much prefer the landscape to the portrait. They want their ideas to be this way, not this way. So just giving students the freedom. And then some teachers say, well, my kids want lines, they need lines. Well, some kids might. And guess what? You can draw them on there if you want them, right? But you could draw lines at the top and then still have room at the bottom to be creative with symbolism or with illustrating an idea. Jess, do you want to talk about the paper on this?
We can, but since they don't have the paper, it's kind of like very abstract. Typically, when you do any kind of notebooks with kids, unless you have a school store where they'll sell like a little cheap sketchbook, you can get them for under $2 even and have them in the school
They're
store.
cheaper than a 3-ring binder.
They are.
By the way, that is empty.
They, you know, a lot of times we just make them ourselves, so they end up with copy paper for real. And what she was saying with the paper is that when you have a real sketchbook of any kind, it's done with a different kind of paper. Copy paper is called hot press paper. It means when the fibers are taken from the tree and then pressed into paper, the paper is very, very hot. So it closes the shaft of the fibers. So it's really slick, which is why if you give it to kids to like put crayons on, it gets real waxy and eventually makes like those little wax like boogers. It's because there's no little pores. Like if you think about like carpet, cold press paper is typically what's in like an art journal, even a cheap art journal, cold water. So the fibers stay a little bit more like a carpet. And then when you draw on it, it can actually stick in there and hold it. And you can layer colors on top of each other. So the kids don't have to be good at art, but just those are kind of things to know. Like if you want kids to do a social studies fair and you give them one of those pieces of high gloss poster board, that's the reason why they have like fingerprints all over it, because the marker smeared and they did crayons or something on it and it's all weird looking. It's because that hot press paper that always gives you the slick, shiny surface doesn't have any of those little fibers to grab onto whatever it is they're using to leave a mark.
And that's the same with the colored pencils too, because the colored pencils and crayons are wax and pigment primarily. And so if you look on the front, this will say maybe mixed media, or it will say it's a heavier duty paper. But if you feel copy paper and you feel this paper, you can tell the difference.
Yeah, it's kind of the difference between like a rough paper towel and a piece of copy paper.
But can you do this with the visual journal with notebook paper? Of course you can. Can you do it with those composition notebooks? Of course you can. We prefer to give you the blank pages because it just expands creativity, but you do with what you got. If you have to, in my classroom, sometimes I went to the copy room, I stapled 5 or 6 sheets of white paper together, and voila, we had a visual journal. So
right. And I did the same thing even as an art teacher in schools where I didn't have a budget. So it happens, it's just what it is.
All right, so we're going to get into our very first strategy for visual literacy, and hopefully you are kind of developing your idea of both what is visual literacy, if a parent or another colleague were to say, well, how would you define it? And also what a visual journal is. So our first activity to teach visual literacy is called 30 seconds, and that's because it lasts how long?
In your mind, it should be 30 seconds, but since Joy designed the name, it is not.
It's called 30 seconds, but it takes 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes. We call it 30 seconds because you divide the time into 30-second intervals. So Jess is going to explain the process.
Thanks, Joy. Where's our picture? The process is that you're going to look at our photograph that we're going to give you, and it's something that as social studies teachers, I would assume you have all seen before. So it's a black and white photograph. And I want you to notice without, well, obviously we're not in the same room, so you can't talk to your table mates, but I want you to look for 30 seconds. Don't write anything down yet. Don't do anything. Just look and notice as many things as you can about the image. What's in it? What does it look like? What colors are used? What shades are used? If it's a black and white picture. And just visually absorb all that stuff. Most people look at something for less than 15 seconds. So I always joke that people look and artists see, because that is one of the main things we teach art students from a very young age, is that they have to actually draw from life or look at things in person, and we make them look at them till they're uncomfortable sometimes, because we tend to see what we think we saw, not what's really in the picture sometimes. And the image that we're going to use, unless Joy changed it since we last looked at it,
I thought about it, but I didn't.
Is a picture that I studied as an art student. I used it in photography classes that I taught. I used it when I taught at Georgia State University with students to talk about art history. And it's something that like I've seen a million times. And when Joy and I sort of broke this process down for the longer day-long session, we both saw things in the picture we had never noticed before. So taking the extra time to look for those visual clues taught us a lot more about the time period that it was created in.
I also want to point out that our kids, like Jess said, I always kind of change what she says to fit what I want it to be. So I will say that kids look, but they don't see. When you have a PowerPoint up, it generally has some text and something to look at, and they'll look at it, but they don't see it because they're waiting for us. They're waiting for us just to tell them what it means or if it means anything. And we want to kind of break them of that. And so this activity is quick, and it allows them to see the image. So we're going to do it together. Everybody's going to drop what you're writing after I just told you to write everything right. So drop what you're writing. Don't just look at this image. And like Jess said, just look for all the things that she said for 30 seconds. I got the timer this time, Jennifer, so that you can 30 seconds, just observe it. Maybe go. That's time. Now I want you to silently take 30 seconds and jot down what you observed. 30 seconds, silently jot down what you observed. Go. I was so going to change it, Jess. I was going to pull one of the pictures from the high today and put it in, and I thought, nah, she'll kill me. It would have been fun, though.
Of course.
And time. All right, now let's take 30 seconds and chat. What did you guys see? What did you think? What did you wonder? And unmute or type in the chat. Jennifer and Joanne are monitoring the chat if you want to put it in there, or feel free to unmute your mic.
I think for me, the first thing I noticed was the body language, obviously, of the woman, because she's in the center of the image.
What about her body language?
But even just like having the hand on her mouth, to me, seems like, and like the worry lines, it seems like she's very concerned about something.
What worry lines?
Like, you know, on your forehead, worry lines.
So the wrinkles?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the wrinkles on her forehead, like her pursed lips, and even like the body language of the children. Obviously, I don't know if the photographer like scared them or if they're just hungry or hungry due to the fact of like what the clothing looks like with the holes and the the ratted edges.
So you're saying your claim is that she's worried. And the evidence that you're using to support that is the hand on the face, the kind of wrinkled, furrowed brow, and the children turning away. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So notice how in social studies inquiry, we want students to make a claim and support it with evidence. And Casey just gets snaps for making claims supporting evidence. Thank you.
Okay, some in the chat have said, Liz says, I hadn't seen the children before. Kimmer 99 says alone. She thinks of the word alone, or he, whoever Kimmer is. And Kimberly says some of the things that Casey just said, tattered clothing ripped with holes. And Kimmer 99 says, wonder where are they? Chandra says, I see anguish in her eyes.
Okay, so that's a claim now, anguish. Why would you say anguish? What about her eyes says that?
I said that because it's like she's wondering or looking, and she seems confused and distraught. It's like, what do I do with her? And then she has her 2 kids by her side.
Only 2?
It's 3. Yeah, it's 3. It's 3. She's holding a baby, and
I thought I was. Oh, I see her face. Yeah, the face now. I was looking at that, trying to find a face, but I didn't in the 30 seconds. But
and what else do you notice about that baby?
Sleeping. The baby is dirty.
Clothing.
The whole family looks dirty.
What do you think she just got finished doing, by the way?
Maybe she just had the baby.
It also kind of, it looks like she was breastfeeding due to how her shirt is kind of
leaning to the side.
Yeah.
Where do you think she is in this image? Inside. There's clues in the image.
Yeah, she's inside somewhere. I can see the walls.
Is it a wall?
It looks,
or maybe a blanket. It looks soft. She could be laying. I don't know, because the little baby that they both got their heads on, it looks like they're on something soft.
It looks like a tent or some sort of.
Well, why would you say that tent?
Because of the fabric in the back.
The fabric, thank you. The fabric.
And you see right here?
The seam, yeah.
There's a seam.
There's a seam.
But there's one more clue that it's a tent. Can you find it?
The hole in the
front of them.
There's a hole right here in the front.
Oh, that's what I was asking. I thought that was a ladder.
It's a pole for the tent. So when Jess and I picked this photo, like it was, we almost didn't choose it because we're like, this is so simple. There's not much to it. But then when we took the 30 seconds to this image that we had seen for literally decades, we found so much more and continue to find so much more information in this, not just by my personal 30-second analysis, but that I jotted down. And by the way, that second 30 seconds where you silently jot your information is essential, because if you jump straight from observation into discussion, what happened? You got 30 kids. What happens? If you go straight from observation to discussion, what do you lose?
You hear the outgoing kids.
Yeah, someone said it, you hear the outgoing students.
And also, even if I'm one of the outgoing students, if Jess starts talking about what she saw and then I'm talking to her about that, I've lost some of the details that I observed myself. And then you have the kids that don't talk much in your class at all. You can still go back to their journal later and read their private thoughts about what their visual analysis was. So that, go ahead, Jess.
I was going to say, the one thing that we did forget to do in this is that partly how we saw the stitching, like I have taught from this picture as an art teacher and professor often, and I never noticed they were in a tent. I never saw that stitching. And part of how Joy and I really dove in and saw this was through Google Images.
Oh, you're right.
And it's free. It's a great way.
I got it. Keep talking.
To show students and allow them to do the inquiry process on their own, especially if you're in a school that's one-to-one. But even if they're not, you can do it on an overhead and you zoom into the picture and Joy will bring it up so you can see it. But Dorothea Lange is a pretty famous photographer. She was part of the WPA during the Dust Bowl. And she went around the United States, and her job basically for the government, because we were employing a lot of artists in that project, was to document what was going on at that time. So she's pulled up Google Arts and Culture, which is a great tool, and it's something that people don't seem to know much about. And it's been around quite a while now.
Has anybody used it? It's my favorite. One, it's free and I'm cheap. And two, it is beautiful and well organized.
So it's great if you're not an art person, because you don't have to know any famous artist to use it, because you can look things up through historical events. So you could look up.
Or historical figures or places. If you're in 6th and 7th grade, you want to use places.
That's true. So if you're doing 6th grade and you're doing, is it still Asia, Oceania, and Africa?
Mm-hmm.
I taught art, and a lot of people don't know that the art standards align to the social studies standards. I taught middle school, high school, and college. So, you know, if you're looking for something to get kids excited about Oceania in 6th grade, you plug that in and this will bring up all the imagery that it has from that era. So you don't have to be an art expert to use it, but this is a way to get kids interested and use it as, you know, a hook to get them going in the inquiry process rather than just reading a handout.
And some of their stuff is 360 cameras, so they can look up and down for climate or vegetation, or some of them are virtual tours too. So do you want to talk about this one, Jess, or the functionality that this?
Yeah, well, Washington Crossing the Delaware is also one of those paintings that lots of people know. It's, you know, been on the covers of history textbooks, and it's well documented in art as well. And this picture we've seen so many times, but we've always seen it really, really small. And if you look at it and you really start using Google Arts and Culture, what ends up happening is you can zoom in to the minute details in the background, which gives the kids a much richer story than they would have gotten from the tiny picture in the textbook. So when we did the 30 seconds activity with this image, there were lots and lots of comments that came up. Like, I never noticed, I thought it was really turbulent water. Well, when you zoom in, you see it's ice. I didn't realize it was that cold at that time. And then when you zoom in even more, you can see there's horses in the background, and you can see what looks like maybe Native Americans in the background.
And some students pull out this one too.
Yeah, a lot of people pull out the person in red. Why do you think that is? Anybody can pipe up.
Is it a woman?
The woman.
What makes you think it's a woman?
Her hair is very fluffy.
She's
and parted on the side.
What else? Can you zoom in a little bit more, Joy, just because of the,
you know, I'm going to warn everyone that this particular, they have 2 or 3 of these loaded, and one of them does not zoom like you want it to zoom. And I don't know why, but it irritates me. So I have to find the right one.
Her facial features are different as well.
Right. And, you know, that tells a whole different story, you know, and then notice where's everybody facing for the most part, if it ever comes back. Here we go.
Now it just wants to be a pain in my butt. Can I say that? I don't know. I
can't get over how many people are on that one boat in that type of weather.
Right. But I never saw the ice. I never saw that what could have been a woman. Everybody has a hat on except him, her. So that's one of the things that people pull out right away. If you go even deeper and look in the
one of them lets you zoom into like their face.
Yeah, a couple of the pictures. So Google has done this as a free service, and it's for every historical era you could ever imagine. So it gives you a way to find artifacts to show students. Even if you're not a musician, it brings up some of the written music. It'll bring up photographs from the period. It'll bring up art pieces from the period. So what are we in now? Is this the 60s? No.
Really, I don't know what this is. Italian campaign. I assume it's World War II. I was trying to get some diversity in objects, but while you talk, I will always pick the wrong one too.
It's okay. But that really what this Google Arts and Culture feature and allowing us to really zoom in. So if your kids have a Surface or they have an iPad or you have a lab that you can borrow, it's like they can just take their fingers and zoom in and zoom in. They get a lot more information and they get a lot more things jotted down than they would have ever absorbed from a handout about the same period.
Okay, so Joanne wants to make sure that we say that the photograph here is migrant mother, which somehow is not in our thing. And also we are at 9 minutes, Jess. 8.
Well, we're almost
Tag, you're it.
So like we said before, social studies has been doing interactive notebooks for a while now as part of the inquiry process. But what we're seeing in the field a lot of times is just a lot of handouts stapled together. So it kind of misses the point. And I know math journals sometimes have the same issue because the students are just filling in things that you gave them. So it's almost like a visual fill in the blank, where if you give them 2 circles and have them do a compare and contrast, that's one thing. But if you have them create a compare and contrast, but they use a symbol like a star to represent one thing or a triangle to represent something else, it gives them more meaning and allows them to attach symbolism to what they're learning. So everybody has notebooks in one way or another. The difference between success and in their purpose is usually that whole idea of personal meaning making.
So some teachers, particularly in the high school classes and things like AP, they say, well, they have to have my notes for my PowerPoint exactly for the test or to prepare. Well, that's great. Send those electronically to the kids or print it out and give it to them if you're face to face and let them, have that in a different place. The visual journal is for their thoughts and their ideas. So when I taught AP World History, when I would get through a particularly hefty PowerPoint slide, I would stop and say, okay, you have 30 seconds or you have 1 minute, depending on your kids, differentiate the time. You have 1 minute to think about the question, like what freedoms are worth fighting for. Think about the question, think about what we just said on this slide, take 30 seconds or 1 minute and translate that to your notes. Summarize what's important, get down your thoughts on that. Your time starts now. So that becomes a much more meaningful note-taking activity than putting up a slide and you have that one kid, you know which one, in the back that's like, no, wait. I just have one bullet left to write. And, 2 minutes later, your class period's over and you haven't gotten through half of the things you needed to do. So
I think the big thing that you'll see with all forms of visual note taking, even if you just do it in the smallest way in your classes, is it really increases engagement of your students and it's going to increase their retention of the materials.
So, do we want to do this activity? Let's just kind of look at it. This is an example from one of the workshops that one of the teachers did. And I just want you to take 30 seconds, which is always my go-to. Let's take 30 seconds and let's just look at this and think about why they used color, how they used color, what was the symbolism about, what does this mean, what is this about? Take 30 seconds. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And I will time us now, 30 seconds. All right, that's 30 seconds. And in the interest of time, we're going to skip that silent, what did you notice personally, write it down, and let's just discuss. What did you see in this particular example? What do you notice about color, about border, about images?
Well, this person used some of the images to point out specific words like seed and farm tools, different colors.
What do you think the colors were representative of?
I would think the blue at the top, and I like they did the little box around it, is basically telling this this is what it's focusing on. And looks like when they came up with a different idea, they were changing the color.
Okay, so different colors for different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Anyone? I'm going to ask it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it looks like an advertisement.
Yeah.
Because
what makes you think that?
For information, contact James Oglethorpe.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they're advertising something or selling of this land or what have you.
Selling.
That's
but it's free, right?
But maybe that's the name, you know, people name properties.
Well, I want to point something out.
Free is also in box.
Yeah.
So kind of like quotations, like.
Is it a box? What else could this be?
I was wondering that too. Like, it was interesting to me that it was free land, but the free it's almost like a fence or something. That's how I kind of looked at it.
This is one of the activities that we do when we.
That you'll get in part 2 or 3.
Yeah, if you're in part 2 or 3. Can I tell them what it is yet?
Yeah.
The activity is we want them to create one of those, like a Zillow real estate ad based on a particular place, historical place. So think about anything that you're teaching, you know, whatever time period you're teaching, you could come up with a historical place from that time period and have students have choices of what they can create a real estate ad for. So, you know, Casey said, this looks like it has a little fence around it. We've had people say it looked like barbed wire. We've had people say it looked like stars and stripes free.
Or little people.
And then, yes, they changed colors so that you got different emphasis that, you know, you could get 50-acre lots. Farm tools are given to you. It's, you know, everything's free, seed too. You get provisions to eat. You've got your, I think it's a T-bone steak where it says meat. So it's not about the drawing. It's not about the art. It's about the symbolism and remembering these things.
Religious freedom, but no Catholics.
So only religious freedom if you're not Catholic. And then it says fertile land for farming. And then the folks who, a teacher made this, and we've had several like it, but this part of the presentation is really us kind of showing things that you can use in the classroom right away that you can adapt to whatever time period you're teaching about.
So what we've covered today is visual journaling, which is part of note-taking, which is making meaning with the content. And that's kind of part 1. That's what they would do every single day in the classroom, whether they're answering your essential question or taking notes or getting down their thoughts about an analysis of a primary source. It's an everyday thing. What we're going to cover in part 2 and part 3 are more summative assessments. How would I use this at the end of a unit to really kind of determine what they learned?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and the visual note taking, what we've talked about today in part 1, is a great way for you to do diagnostic assessment in the classroom and formative assessment in the classroom. That's not a worksheet. Kind of stop being married to your copier. And start having students do some of the exploration themselves. People find that they start in small steps and that it doesn't end up taking any extra time.
One thing I noticed, if I can comment, please, on that, the visual that you had before where I was thinking it was a student that was actually doing this. And I thought it was clever that they were actually, to me, defining the word provisions. That's why they use what they did, the pictures to help with that.
with the bread
Mm-hmm.
and
So
the
that
meat.
would help them to remember the meaning for provisions.
Mm-hmm. So vocabulary, using visual strategies for vocabulary. And by the way, SWIRL is something that we borrowed from our EL teachers, from our ESOL teachers, because that speaking, writing, illustrating, reading, and listening, that builds fluency. And what I noticed when I started using it with my kids who were refugee kids who had only been in the country and learned English for 6 months, and welcome to US history, and now please take the test, right? So I'm desperately trying to build their English language while teaching them US history, but I noticed my gifted kids magically started to increase their productivity, increase their scores, because I was forcing them to focus on methods of thinking that they were not experts at. Like, they were great readers, they were great writers, but you try to give them a graphic novel and they would push it back. They're like, no, I'll read Grapes of Wrath. I don't want to read this comic book. But that's because they struggled with visual literacy. And so swirling every day forced them to focus on areas of weakness as well as areas of strength. So the answer to where does visual literacy fit in the Look For's document of social studies inquiry is everywhere, right? Visuals are part of the sources. They analyze those sources in SWIRL. You have good questions associated with visuals. They are discussing and debating and asking all of the questions, historical questions, geographers, economists, all of those questions with the same visuals. So it fits everywhere. And remember that true art integration is both teaching and assessing both contents equally. So Jess, I know we're quick, but there's one of these standards that
every grade level K through 12 in art, visual art, aligns to social studies, in that there is always a standard, regardless of what grade level, that is about that art is related to the community, culture, and world of the artist. So it's all about discovering the personal relationship between the environment the artist lives in, the community the artist lives in, and the artwork. So there's a standard, no matter what, that relates to social studies, and it's not period specific. So you can really impress your principal by looking up the GSE for visual arts, grabbing this one standard. So you can see this one is for first grade. So it's VA is visual art, one is for first grade. CN is our domains, our standards follows connecting. So we're connecting to social studies. Investigate and discover personal relationships to the artist, to community, culture, and the world. Explore the influence of artists and their work in a variety of cultures, or it could be historical art forms. And then many of the grade levels, especially at the elementary level, also have a standard that talks about integration into other subjects. Here's sixth grade, just to give you an idea. It changes a little bit, but it's basically the same. Reflect on the context of art in relation to community, place, and world. So time and place and culture become a big thing. So you would teach this standard, this might be on your board with your social studies standards for the day, so you can impress your administration when they come through. But the idea is, when you teach, there's art education that your art teacher is going to do, or your music teacher. There's arts integration, and that's usually where the art standard and the standard that's being taught, whether that's social studies or math, they're held at the same level of fidelity. And then there's what I always call arts enhancement, which is somewhere in the middle. Like, we all learned the ABC song to learn the ABCs. It didn't teach us anything about music. So you're kind of using the arts to teach your subject area. So you want to be true arts integrators and make sure that you're also elevating the art standards as well. And then in high school, there's also a standard for every class.
And you don't have to do all of the art standards. You can pick one or two that you focus on throughout the year, but making sure that the kids know. I mean, if you look at the 30-second activity we did with Dorothea Lange, did we identify how the issues of time, place, and culture are reflected in that artwork? Sure. All we had to do was talk about that it was created during the Great Depression, and have a conversation about that. And what was the intent of this photograph? Just talked a little bit about Dorothea Lange and who she was hired by and what her goal was. So just doing that meets that standard, those elements for art.
You also had mood. You guys said it was really sad. So element B under that standard.
And then, oops, I went the wrong way. Where's the keeping an ongoing visual and verbal record? If you guys are having them keep this visual journal throughout each day, they are making connections, they're recording, researching, planning, reflecting. So you're meeting that standard. But the key here is the kids have to know it too, right? They have to know that, hey, I'm working on both this art standard, but also my social studies standard. Jess, you want to talk about 5 there? Anything in that one particularly?
Yeah, it's talking about relevant traditional and contemporary practices and artistic ideation. It's a little heavier into the art side, but the idea that artists' ideas come from the world in which they live or reside, but that they also might use traditional practices, like they might be doing weaving that's Navajo based, even though it's a contemporary sculpture. And then that gives you an idea to be able to tie in something that's really modern with, say, you're teaching about the Navajo tribe.
We have run out of time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip forward. And I'm going to give you your homework assignment. You're welcome. So your homework assignment is to get this thing back on the screen. Hold on. Please hold. I'm transferring you now. Aha. All right. Your homework, ta-da, is to take some visual notes yourself. You have meetings at schools. Just start in your faculty meetings, in your professional learning that you do, start keeping your own visual journal and maybe assign this to your students. They can do it virtually. They can do it. We have some teachers who, again, we've done this workshop about 25 times, and some schools were one-to-one and they were paperless. So, and I think actually on Instagram, we have some examples of visual journals as well on our teacher takeovers. But give some assignments to your kids, have them to think visually as they take their notes. Do the 30-second activity. And then come back to part 2, where we'll take a little bit more time to really go further into arts integration and then give you a lot more of Jess. Jess is going to talk about the different forms and structures of a visual journal. And I put this on there. Jess, do you want him to do the colored pencil tutorial, or do you want to wait and do that in the next one?
No, it makes more sense to do it next time.
Okay, so your homework is just to start trying to visual journal yourself, and then take visual notes and get your kids to do it, maybe the 30-second activity. And then next time you'll get a personalized tutorial on how to use colored pencils, and you'll learn more about some simple, easy ways to add some structure to your visual notes in your visual journals. We have Twitter, Facebook, and our Instagram is a teacher takeover. We encourage you to join us. Jess also has some really awesome stuff on Twitter and Facebook. Our emails are there. Again, this PowerPoint is going to be posted for you if you need to go back. There is one thing that we ask you to do before you leave. It kind of help. This is the first time we've done this like this. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's a super hands-on class, and yeah.
So your feedback is much appreciated, and it will help us to shape part 2. If you think we went too fast, if you think we needed more activities, if you think we took too long on pieces, that's helpful. So you can either scan the QR code with your phone, or I can actually I can mess that up royally. How about I just put the link in the chat? How about that? And I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to try to find the chat. And then I'm going to put the link in it. And there you go. Haha. So that's our feedback form. Thanks, you guys, for taking your time to be with us today. I appreciate it, because it's really not fun when you're by yourself. And you guys really participated, which makes it so much better.
Thank you so much.
And thanks, Jess, and all of the rest of the DOE team for being here. I couldn't have had this offering for our social studies teachers without Jess, because, you know, she knows the art stuff. And you know, how's it art integrated if it's not both of us, right?
That's true.
Be cool stuff. Any questions, comments, outrageous objections? I always want an outrageous objection.
I just really appreciate, I really like the idea of visual literacy, because I think our students have a lot to say, and if we don't ask questions, we can't hear or know what they're thinking. I think it's important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we get really focused on the test, and there's a right answer. And art allows a lot of gray. It's not all black and white, and it gives them a place to think it out that they don't necessarily always get in the general ed classroom.
And from the chat, Liz says, thank you all. And Casey says, amazing job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and be sure to visit us for part